Well,
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I feel like we haven't had a program in so long and missed doing it, but thank you. I'm so glad you all could come tonight. I'm Terry Robinson, and I'm president of the South Hero Historical Society. We just started last October, but we've been doing quite a bit and very excited about the programs we've had. And Peg Clark is our vice president, and Sue Crowley is our treasurer. And I'd like to encourage people to become members because our next meeting is the annual meeting.
Take your money right over here.
$10. $10, and it helps us make the DVDs for the library and helps us have the equipment and things that we need to do for that. And the next meeting, we would love to have people come and tell us what other programs you like in town and who would do, you know, talks and stuff. So we'd love to have you come. It's October 2nd, and Peg will tell you more about that. And we have Dolph Wurzing is our secretary. Is Dolph here today? No, he's not here. Okay. And Brett Corbin is with us in the back there, and Judy Duvall right here. And who else do we have? Ken Rochelo back there. And we welcome
And Hazel Pope.
And Hazel. Hazel's with us too, and Hazel has a lot to do with the museum.
All on the board.
All of us are on the board. And we had that museum program that went really well this summer. And a lot of people got to see the museum that had said they'd never been before, so that was nice. So, Peg, I'll let you introduce tonight and talk about the October 2nd meeting, and that's it for me. Oh, and I just want to say this is Paige Brownell and Morgan Brownell, and they are helping. They're junior historians with us.
It's great to have all of you with us tonight. And it's wonderful to have you who have agreed to be on the program. You know, doing the program has been a little iffy. Believe it or not, some people have just said no when I've asked them to do things. But other people have stepped right up to the plate. In fact, our next program is going to be on the sandbar because Bill Phelps offered to do this because his grandfather and his great uncle owned the sandbar, and they had the little toll booth where they sat out there and took money from people. And he has a lot of stories, not only about the sandbar, but just South Hero in general. In fact, I believe his father planted all those trees along the south side of South Street that they're now trying to cut down because they're falling. Tonight, our program is about tourist camps that served meals. Not that they do now, but at one time they had wonderful meals. And there's some that do that now, and we may have them at a later date. But tonight we are featuring Lakeside Tourist Camp, which some of you may have, I always called it the Giffords Camp, because that was what I knew. My introduction to South Hero was as a newlywed to rent Margaret Whittlesey's camp, which was adjoining Lakeside. And so we got to know Mrs. Gifford, who was a great lady of South Hero. And also, we have Priscilla Norton Arnold, and she's part of Skyland, which is 3 generations, am I correct?
Almost 4.
Almost 4. Do your children come up and help?
No.
Hence the almost.
Maybe later.
Almost in Seattle and almost North Carolina, so.
Well, that's a little hard. Yeah. But they came up here when they were young.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
They come to visit, not to help.
Well, we're going to start with Lakeside because for Lakeside, we have Sandy Gregg and Gretchen Patterson. And they were faithful campers for many years. And we're going to start with them because if Sandy sneaks out the door, it's because she has to drive to Rhode Island tonight. So we thank her very much for coming and being with us tonight. I have a little card here, an ad. It says Lakeside Tourist Camp, South Hero, Vermont. First class camp, good bathing, running water, flush toilets, boating and fishing, plenty of shade, furnished cottages to rent by day, week, or month, overnight cabins. H.B. Howard, proprietor. And it seems that he was the first, I guess he was the first owner, an operator. And he sold it to the Allens, Bob and Grace Allen, who owned it for a number of years, and Malcolm Allen, who has been a wonderful contributor to this group, called and said, you know, I knew it when it was in, when the Allens had it, and I'll come and talk. Unfortunately, Nancy isn't feeling well, and he couldn't get someone to stay with her, so he's not here tonight. But also, and also not here with us is Ann Gifford Kruger, who lives up across from Ethlin and there. But she couldn't come because she's not feeling well. So this is a letter from Mrs. Gifford, and I expect it could have been a letter from your mom, too, to the regular campers. It's springtime once again in South Hero, Vermont. The birds are singing, trees are budding, and all our thoughts turn once again to gardening and making ready at Lakeside Tourist Camp. Those of you who knew Mrs. Gifford, doesn't this sound like her? In looking through old records, we found this year is the 25th anniversary of the origin of Lakeside by Mr. and Mrs. Howard. We are told that the two large cottages and the one far down in the woods were the only buildings. In 1934, it was sold to Mr. and Mrs. Robert Allen, who owned it for over 10 years. They improved and added the buildings now here. It was our pleasure to be their guest for some years and to purchase the camp from them. It will be our 6th season, and we are looking forward to many more happy years at Lakeside. We plan to send out each springtime a newsletter of our doings here in South Hero, Vermont. It has been very pleasant living here in South Hero, and we enjoy the friendship of our island neighbors very much. However, we are kept very busy in the fall, winter, and now spring, doing much improvement and general upkeep in camp, and especially this past winter. Dad, better known to most as Uncle Pete, has been plumber, carpenter, painter, electrician, and boat builder this year. Did you know him? Mm-hmm. But I must tell you that we have also become veteran fishermen, catching a great deal of perch and smelt. These were hooked in front of camp in Keeler's Bay, and there were 11 fishing shanties and 3 times as many people and cars out on the lake. Uncle Pete and young Roland filled the camp ice house on February the 16th. Who's Roland?
Son.
Oh, okay. The chunks were 21 inches thick and weighed 250 pounds. Yes, all the men had lame backs after that. I was busy at the time preparing hearty meals for all the ice workers along with reticking many pillows. Oh, those feathers. And rebinding a number of blankets for the summer use. Have been looking into the possibilities of installing bottled gas cook stoves in the housekeeping cottages. I have enjoyed using this gas in the main kitchen and would like to see the housekeeping ladies having the same convenience. Did you folks hear that we stayed at camp until November 7th, as our brick house, which is just across the street, was occupied by an employee of the Vermont State Fish and Game Service until that time. We accomplished a great deal at camp this fall. Had one of those huge bulldozer machines in to remove the stone and large rocks on the beach, and it looks lovely now. At the present, the water is much higher than this time last year. Rainbow Cabin is now a housekeeping cottage with great improvements and will be known as the Maury Cottage. Did you all realize that each building is named after a lake in this state of Vermont? Some weeks ago, the seed catalogs came, and since then we have been discussing and ordering our seeds for another big garden. We are looking forward to a big crop of strawberries this summer. By the way, the big thing about Mrs. Gifford's place was her asparagus patch. How many acres was it? I don't know.
42.
We'll have them piled. She was happy to share them, but she didn't want you to snitch any. Still have them piled high on fluffy biscuit and snowed over with fresh whipped cream. Please leave the scales, tape measures, and diets at home. Have been making a great many new and different kinds of homemade bread. I think you will all like my crusty, fresh French bread and old-fashioned rye. While I think of it, if you are planning to be with us over Memorial Day, better let us know soon as you can. Reservations are coming rapidly for summer, and we are hoping you will be with us and that the weather, also the fishing, will be fine. And then she tells about her sons who are wondering if they're going to have to go to war before they go to college. We lost dear old Jackie. The old dog just gave up, and we will miss him very much. Want to thank all of you folks who so kindly sent me pictures of Jack. Now I have a new pup and a pretty Persian kitty. Also Duddy and Polly, the parrot, who celebrated her 57th birthday.
She lived past that.
Wish I knew her secret for keeping so young looking. We hope you all are as well as we are, and that the rest of 1951 will be full of joys and good health to you and yours.
Nice,
Now we have some pictures that Anne's mother collected for us, and this is a picture. Let's put down the lights for a little bit because you can see the cars. Can we dim the lights for just a minute?
Sorry, I forgot the microphone.
You mean they couldn't hear my
They
speech?
could hear you, but for the DVD, we need the microphone.
Can you see there? Some of those cars look really old.
Where was this, or where is it?
It's across from the Lawrence farm.
Gifford Lane.
Oh, okay. All right.
Is it still there?
Yes,
Well,
I'll address that. Yes.
okay. We have some more pictures, and we can
She
turn
can
back
do
the
them.
lights up.
Morgan can do the pictures when you're ready. She knows
Yeah,
what
we're
to do.
ready now.
Go ahead,
And
Morgan.
we can put the lights back on. I just wanted people to see those cars.
I'm getting the microphone ready.
We can be.
And this is Mr. Gifford.
I don't think you'll mind this, it's really lowish, it's not really too.
What was his name?
Pete. Pete.
Roland.
Roland,
Roland.
the first
But
Roland.
we called him Uncle Pete.
Uncle
Yeah.
Pete.
Okay, next. You can see that car behind. Oh, these are the fishing shanties. How's this? Is that okay? Do you know, anybody know who those are? I think maybe one of them may be Janice Jackson. Is one of them Janice? I don't know. Okay? These were girls who worked in the dining hall. Did you know any of those?
They just brought the food.
We were little.
Oh, you
That's what it
started.
said on the back.
Oh, Lawrence, Joyce. Lawrence.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Still on Otis campus.
Right.
You know where the family? They said across the street.
Oh, this one over here is Janice Jackson, I believe. Is that look right, Judy?
One on the left, I think, Judy.
Should we turn off the lights again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, see them.
I think that Ken can't make it.
Is that better? Or shall I turn it
Should be.
Can you see though, Ken?
I can see, we'll see how it picks up.
Okay. Okay, next. They also worked in the dining. And this is Roland Margaret, and I don't know who the other guy is.
Yes.
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 Okay. Do some of you know Anne Gifford Proven? She looks a lot like her grandmother, you know, younger.
No, there wasn't a fence there when I was there.
Now, this is the dining hall. She said she was sorry she didn't have a picture of the inside.
Now, is that building still there?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
What is it used for?
It's a private, do you want us to?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, take off.
It's a private home right now.
Your dad's car.
Oh, that is embarrassing. Oh, that is really truly embarrassing because that's an Edsel.
That's probably your dad.
And that's probably my dad and my mother.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, we always stayed in Sunset Cottage, and as kids, we just thought we owned it. Because we were there for the same period every year, the last 2 weeks of July and the first 2 weeks of August. And it was heaven. There were two highlights in the year, Christmas and Giffords.
And where did you live? Where did you come from?
Dare I say New Jersey? Yeah. The fish, and the fishermen would come in, and if they came in really late at night, they would, you'd hear the stringer, the jingle, jingle, jingle of the stringer as it came up the stairs. And everybody came flocking out of the cottages because you wanted to see the catch. And if they didn't feel like cleaning all those fish at 10 o'clock at night, we'd help, and my brothers and I would go in and we'd clear off the sawdust in the ice house. And with that catch, a really big area was cleared. And then fishermen would lay the fish flat down on the ice, hold the stringer up, cover it with sawdust, put a little stake in, wrap their stringer around it, and the next day pull them out. They were nice and fresh and semi-frozen, and there'd be a cleaning fest. and this is why my dad was there. You see that must be a really big sheep's head down on the ground. My brothers used to cut out the lucky stones, which is probably really bad. We didn't eat the fish, dare I say, but the sheep's head has the lucky stones. And if one of my brother's girlfriends were really lucky, they got a bracelet made out. There are these little white bone-like things that are on either side of the fish's brain. They're small. Yeah. Bass. That's why my family was there. My mother liked to troll for walleye, and my father would occasionally humor her and take her out trolling for walleye. But we were there for bass. Oh, I remember them. Indeed. And, you know, as a child, Mrs. Gifford, Aunt Peg, was the sweetest person, and that is the smile that greeted you, no matter where you were, and no matter how busy she was. She rarely had a hair out of place, but you knew really not to tease her if there was a tiny hair out of place, because she prided herself on her beautiful hair. And so we tried to really behave ourselves when we saw a little wisp out of place. And when we did call her Aunt Peg, I'm not so sure she was fond of that, but we did. Uncle Pete was a charmer. Oh, that is the inside of the lodge. Yes. Fireplace at the end. The door to the entrance is behind the young man with the flat top back there. And beautiful dining hall. Had a welcome. Gretchen, is the desk still there? The check-in desk?
I don't think so.
Okay.
And it was a beautiful knotty pine, and now it's painted white. It looks quite a bit different, but it's still, you know, you can tell it was the dining room.
I had a very important job bringing the penny postcards up to the out box. I felt really important doing that. And mail, we got mail, and it was delivered with a smile. Meals were amazing in there. Go ahead, go ahead. Meals were amazing, which could contribute to the fact that I am what I am today. On Friday nights, I'm not sure what's going on here other than it's a party, and they had parties quite often. On Friday nights, I do recall, the main meal was served at 12:30, midday, because the fishermen got up, went out early, came back, got their main meal midday, and then in the evening, it was a lighter supper. And on Fridays, go ahead, girls, it's good. On Fridays, they would serve a special summer buffet. Ah, yes, there it is. Awesome. Puzzles, magazines would always be stacked over on that window seat to the left. Always a nice table with a jigsaw puzzle going. If there was even the slightest chill, okay, in the air, there'd be a lovely little fire going in there. Crystal.
Okay, got a name?
Got a name?
Crystal's still there. Doug, my husband, and I stayed in Crystal, when we were in college. I went up with my parents. They made him sleep on the porch. I had to sleep with my sister. But that cottage is still on the premises, although it's not in that location. In that location now is our house.
Where did you move the cottage to?
We did,
People who bought part of the complex moved the cottage back up on the other side of the road. And it's not habitable now, but it's still there.
Yeah, this was a different time. This was a time when people sat and actually talked. Around about I started going there in 1948. I was years old, and it wasn't until later in the 50s when they actually brought a television in. It was a mistake, absolutely. Oh, yeah. See that infamous diving board? I could tell you stories about that diving board.
Please do.
There used to be a gaggle of youth down at the end of the bay who would swim up. My husband is cowering in the back. Because he was a member of that gang. And they would invade because we had a diving board. And Mrs. Gifford would occasionally come down and with broom in hand and stand at the top of the stairs waving the broom. You young people get off of that diving board. That was as mean as I ever saw her. There was a boat boy who, if it rained, bailed your boat. Those were the chambermaids. Because we were in our cottage for 4 weeks. I was really lucky. We were there for 4 weeks. They would come in and do a light cleaning, and my mother insisted that we make our own beds. So otherwise, they would have made the bed for us. But I actually enjoy making a bed, and I can't tell you how sick that is. But they were delightful gals and always had fun. Yeah, sometimes it was, oh, that's Joan Howald in the foreground.
Oh, yes. That's our cousin.
That's her cousin. Yep. It was all in the family. There was sometimes no room on that dock.
Mm-hmm.
Good swimming there. That looks like, Gretchen, does that look like the...
The ice house.
That's the ice house was on the other side, and this is actually Uncle Pete's workshop on this side. And there was I think I might have it backwards, the structure with the X on the right, I think that was over in the fish cleaning area. And there was a spring faucet that came out of the side of this building. And it was part of my family's tradition to play rummy. We called it Lake Champlain rummy. We cheated. All the black twos were wild. And we'd take a break midway through because it was quite an interesting game in my household. It was practically a contact sport. We'd take a break to cool off, and I was sent out because I was the youngest to get a pitcher of water from that spigot, and it was lovely because it came in under the ice in the ice house. So it'd be really warm evening, balmy evening, and there would be a fresh pitcher of ice water. Oh my, I remember that boat. This was like the biggest yacht we had ever seen. Right, Gretchen?
I don't remember that.
Oh yeah. When anything like that came in, it was magical. Huh, okay. Fancy. Wow. Fish, more fish. And I can recall there was a Mr. Wallace who was quite the walleye fisherman. And usually during their 2 weeks there, he would catch enough walleye that Mrs. Gifford and Angie, the cook, would serve up walleye fish dinner. Oh, fantastic.
I'm going to take those now, and then Sandy will put hers up. Oh, here's one more. Oh, you're up, okay, okay, sorry.
No, it's history, but I'll put up for today.
The girls can do these.
Okay, I was just,
Okay,
I thought that was the last one, but she has
Oh.
a few more.
nice. This is, when I went there, a number of the cottages were just sleepers. And some of them didn't even have their own bathroom. You'd go to a central bathroom that had a shower. Men on one side, women on the other. Very discreet. Oh yeah, there it is. I remember. They were very nice too. They took all of us kids for rides.
Whoever they were.
Whoever they were, I can't remember their names, but they were very nice.
Well, rest too.
Yes, indeed. I can remember many a rough day pounding my brains out as my father, who insisted on fishing at the north end of Savage in a north wind, because the bass were only there in a north wind, according to my father. And heading into a north wind to the north end of Savage, I had to sit in the bow of the boat and I got pounded.
Okay, thank you. So, you have some?
They could just put those on. That would be great. Thanks, ladies. This is the cottage. This is Sunset Cottage. That was actually sent to my parents from Bob and Grace Allen, probably 1942. Nice boats. Boats were all wooden, as I recall. And then they got all fancy and got these aluminum boats in. Wow, it was like a whole era. And this is where I perfected my game of croquet. It should have been an Olympic sport when I was 6, because I was pretty good at croquet. That's the dining hall. The kitchen was on the left, and there's the door in the center. It went right into the dining hall, and then the screened-in porch was on the right. Ping pong was played out on the screened-in porch. And this was a circular drive that went around this area. And then the horseshoes were on the right, and the Adirondack chairs. Probably spent at least 2 hours a day playing croquet. This is my cousin, actually my mother's nephew, Hal Prout. And this is out at Savage Island. And let me tell you, back then, Savage Island was open to the public. And we would go out at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. We'd pack up a picnic. And when we left Savage, you'd never know that we had been there. Unfortunately, later, people abused the privilege of going there. And Mr. Reilly put up the no trespassing signs. Except he gave my father a note that said Carl Saylor had permission to be on Savage Island and picnic. But he had to have the responsibility of policing the island. So when my dad died, and we were going through his things, in his wallet, folded up into a little square, is that note. Does anybody recognize the babe on the left? Hey Doug, do you know who that is? That's this lady right here, and her sister Amy.
Morgan's going to show you where Gifford Lane is. Okay, so it's actually this one. We're talking about the bay down there. So Gifford Lane points to there, so the back road.
Yeah, it's right across from the Lawrence Farm, Bayview Farm, I believe it's called. And I didn't get to spend as much time there as Sandy because my dad always had to work, so I was lucky if I got a week, and it might have not have been every summer, but I was there quite a bit, and some memories I have are, you know, throwing rocks off the dock. The beach was rocky and shale, and I never knew what a sandy beach was until my husband and I honeymooned on Cape Cod. I thought all beaches were shale. That's what they were. Sandy's dad and my dad were brothers, and I grew up in Cooperstown, New York, which was closer. We could get there more easily, but my dad was always tied down with work. Let's see, I do remember the boat rides to Savage. They took forever. You had that big wooden boat, 5 horsepower motor. It seemed like a 2-hour ride. It was unbelievable.
The ice cream cones.
Oh yeah, the ice cream cones. There was a big chest freezer in the side porch to the left, and you just go in and ask Mrs. Gifford for an ice cream cone, and you got one.
10 cents.
Oh, I always thought they were free. Your dad probably paid for them.
You got yours free?
That's called stealing, isn't it?
And Peter and Sandy built a house here last year, and Doug and I started coming back up regularly to Lake Champlain in 2000, and we were renting from a friend, and they said, you need to look at this house that's been for sale on Gifford Lane. And Doug and I went and looked at it, and it was beautiful. We fell in love with it and decided, since he was retired and I suppose I could retire, we would move up here if we could make an offer on it and that was acceptable. And it was, and things went fast, and we moved here January 28th and sold our house south of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 2 days' time. So things just went like, you know, we bid on it in December, I guess, and moved in January. It was fast. Okay, so I'm living where I vacationed as a kid, and I have current pictures of things that are still there. The lodge is still there. They're just, some of the camps are still there. They've been moved around a little bit. I don't know if you are familiar with the Blue Bus? No. That was vandalized last fall before we moved there, but that's in front of the lodge. Okay, so there's the lodge at the top, and they always had the names on all the cottages, and the people who own the lodge have 2 of the little cottages on their property, and the names are still there, just like they used to be when I was a kid. And I know Sandy and I stayed in Silver because, you know, if there were a lot of sailors there, somebody had to sleep somewhere, so Sandy and I got stuck off in some other place. But it still basically looks pretty much the same. There's Crystal, the one that probably was where our house is now, or where the neighbor to the north is, we're not sure. And then the other one hasn't moved, and I don't know the name. You thought it was Beaver, but I don't know. And there are people in it now. Our neighbors rent that one out seasonally, so the people are going to stay there through the end of October, I think. And then these are the cabins that Sandy stayed in Sunset. That was a 3-bedroom, and Champlain is really right next door to it, and that was a 2-bedroom, and those are still there. The ice house is still there, and all 3 of those are owned by the same person. And then there were a lot of steps.
64.
Oh, okay.
That counted the stairs on Sunset, and there were a lot on that front porch.
Yeah, there are a lot on Sunset. So, and I think the Giffords started to sell things off in the late 70s. That's when the camp farthest away, Forest, was sold to a guy named Bob Gannock, I think he lives in Williston. And I think he's done a lot of remodeling. I haven't seen that. And then I think the lodge and the 2 little red cabins were sold in about 2004. But I'm not sure. And I know the lot that our house is on was sold in '77 by Mrs. Gifford to the people who built the house that we bought. So, but it was an ideal place to vacation, and just loved it. And I do have a lucky stone from a sheep's head. I should have brought it. Not all of Bruce's girlfriends got them. Sometimes a little cousin got one too.
That's where it went.
So, any questions?
Well, thank you.
Great.
This is, I have no idea. Yeah, that was great.
Did anybody else here stay in any of the cottages? You did? You cleaned them.
I did.
You stayed in them?
I have a personal story that I'd like to share if you'd like to hear it. My mom was a cook for Mrs. Gifford for quite some time. And during that time, my mom met the love of her life, who was Hollis Robinson, who lived at the South End. And Mrs. Gifford just pursued that relationship. She just pushed them together, and they finally married, and Mr. and Mrs. Gifford stood for them. And also, Peg gave them a huge shower at the town hall. It was at Christmas time, and when they came back from their honeymoon, there was a huge Christmas tree with gifts just piled all around that tree. And then, later on in the years, Mom and Peg were like sisters. And when Mr. Gifford died, well, one of the things that I thought was very outstanding was Mrs. Gifford's son, Bill, became the Assistant Secretary of the United States Treasury. And when, well, he graduated from Fordham University, and extremely intelligent. And then, of course, everyone knows that George became the undertaker in Richmond for many, many years. But the thing that I really wanted to say was when Mr. Gifford passed away, I was at Peg's house, in the evening, and the President of the United States called. And that was President Nixon at the time. And he was giving his condolences to Mrs. Gifford and the family. And they were really a wonderful family and loved dearly by everyone, and they were certainly an asset to the whole town. And it's sad to have them all gone.
Well, not all. Anne is still here.
The immediate family.
Yeah. Thank you, Joyce.
They have one son that's still alive, Roland.
Yes, yes. Well,
Hey,
yes.
I just want to say, Joyce will probably remember this too. Mrs. Gifford, you always knew when she was in church at St. Rose because she had a very high voice. And she liked to sing, and she said the prayer a little slower than everybody else. She always had the last word. Every hymn, you could hear her above the entire congregation with her voice. And so you always knew you're sitting there saying, Mrs. Gifford's here today.
Well, I was talking with Bill Phelps, and I understand that it wasn't just Lakeside that had romances with local people. He said that several of your campers at Skyland married local people, including his brother John, who married Nancy. And so this is Priscilla Norton Arnold. And you can take it from here.
Yep.
really interesting for me because I knew the Giffords, and actually when Bill was in Washington, my husband had a National Science Foundation conference that we went to, and Bill arranged for a special tour of the White House for us. They were dear, dear people and very good friends of my grandparents. So I appreciate all your stories. The similarities are amazing. Closer? Is that better? I mean, my grandparents lived in New York City, and they searched all over New England wanting to start a camp for families. They went through, they didn't go to Connecticut because they felt that was a little close to New York City, and they were trying to find a country place where people could escape the city. So they did go to New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, and the last journey was to Vermont in search of a place, some property where they could build a camp. They had taken their family to a camp in the Adirondacks for many years, Camp of the Woods. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. Anyway, they arrived in South Hero across that sandy sandbar in a Model T. And when you think of coming from New York City in 1926, that was a journey. They stopped at the country store, which was then owned by Juan Robinson?
Joanne.
Joanne is the way it was said? Oh. I'm going to learn a lot tonight. And they asked if there was any property locally for sale, and they said, oh, the farmer at the end of the road, who was Horace at that time, I believe.
Clarence Robinson, maybe?
Clarence?
Yeah, my stepdad's father owned the whole point, the whole South End at one time.
Okay, well, that's exactly where they went.
That was Clarence Robinson.
Clarence, I'm sorry. And he took them down to Skyland, which was, at that time, a 6.5 acre sheep pasture. The sheep had the most beautiful view in the state of Vermont. And my grandmother immediately loved it, and she got out of the car, bent down, and picked a 4-leaf clover. And she said, this is the spot. So they began right away that year to have cottages built and a main dining hall. You can keep showing those pictures maybe. This is the lake shore. That's when the old bridge used to be across what is now the bike trail. That was an old turnstile bridge that they would allow sailboats to go through every once in a while, and 2 men had to live out there all summer long for that. But there are 2 points at Skyland. This is taken from the back side of one, and it goes over to the other point, and it's all shale beach like you mentioned. Okay. Now, this was the original office on the left, and that building is still there. We had to do major renovating on it about 10 years ago and had to raise the floor 26 inches. You can imagine how some of these old buildings have deteriorated. Then there was a row of cottages that were little duplex. They had twin beds and a sink and a toilet, and that was it. I don't know if you can see the little trees that are planted in front. Those were the famous poplar trees that line South Street. And I didn't know the Phelps were responsible for those, but I always wondered. My dad could remember jumping over those trees when they bought the property when he was 10. And he can remember as a youngster hopping over them. And many times as we raked leaves in the fall, he'd say, well, Priscilla, this is going to be your problem to deal with in the future. But they grew to over 70 feet tall, and we had to remove them after the ice storm of '98. They were just shattered. And this was a dining hall. They opened for business in 1927, and they were able to have about 100 guests at a time. I'm sure there were some weeks when it wasn't that busy, but okay, I think there's one of the inside. Yeah, this is the inside. And we have thousands of pictures from camp, and it was really difficult trying to whittle it down. But this is the only picture I've seen that shows the kerosene lamps. There was no electricity at the beginning of Skyland. And that's another view inside. I
Now,
was-
did I hear that they had congregational church suppers there?
They did, they did. My grandparents advertised it as a Christian camp on Lake Champlain, and before each meal, they would have a prayer, and in the morning, my grandfather would read scripture, and the kids would get antsy in their seats, and every Sunday night, there was a hymn sing. But always this wonderful feeling of family and closeness with the campers, which I hear from you too. It's an experience when you're on vacation to just be with other people, relaxing and getting to know each other. The fireplace still remains. We've had to close off a portion of the rec hall because children were starting fires in it at night, and we just didn't want to lose the building. And it never really had a very good draft to it, and was quite often smoky, so it was difficult to have it going during a meal. Now that shows you an old car. I think these shots were probably from the 30s, but the front of that sign says Camp Skyland, and the back says, "Must you go?" And after Jack and I started operating it now 40 years ago, probably about 20 years ago, we discovered that old sign tucked underneath the dining hall. And we had no idea that it still existed, but of course I could remember it as a kid. And our daughter-in-law restored it, and it now hangs over a planter that we have with flowers, because the trailers that come to visit us now are much too high to have it over the road. This is another picture. This one was dated, and I just loved the car, so I stuck that in. 1931. That's in front of the dining room. Another shot of it. To the right was the kitchen, and a wing off of that was an ice house, just like the Giffords had. I think that's the same one. And that grapevine still exists today, and I tell my grandmother every time I trim it that enough is enough. It grows so quickly, but it actually produces little frost grapes that you can make jelly out of. I'm trying to focus on the meal portion of Skyland, which was fabulous. This is a chef that they had for many years that came up from Florida, and his name was John Veal. Ronnie, I'm sure, remembers Veal. He was wonderful and quite a character to boot. They usually, at the time I worked at camp as a teenager, we had about 4 girls doing the cabin work and the laundry, and usually 10 or 12 boys that waited on table and helped cook. One fella cleaned all the fish that the fishermen caught. I always thought it was a pretty good ratio myself, but Veal did the greatest part of the work. And this is a picture of Veal in 39, is that? Yeah. And I am not sure who the other person is, but she too was a cook. In one of the albums, we have so many pictures. There's a picture of Veal as a very young man, and my grandparents still lived in New York City during the winter. And there's a picture of the Statue of Liberty, and then there's a picture of Veal as a very young man taking the Floridians to New York City. And they had met Veal in Florida, and often would hire boys from Florida to come up, and also girls as well. And this is just a picture of staff to give you some idea of. And usually they were 15 to 18. We worked hard and played hard and had an awfully good summer. And this was another cook, Mrs. Bills. Cabin was, the office was pretty rustic, just like the cabins, wood frame. A lot of local kids worked there. I don't know if you remember the Dodge children in Grand Isle, they all worked there. Lois came back last summer to visit, and she said, I just need to get in one of those cabins. I just need to get in one of those cabins. And I said, what for? She said, I just want to smell that old wood. Yeah, I think, Ronnie, you can help me. I think one of these staff members is,
The third from the right would be Clyde.
that's what I
Phelps.
thought.
And I remember, that might be Dick on the right, I'm not sure. But I remember my grandmother used to raise raspberries, and I used to pick raspberries for 10 cents a quart for her, and she'd sell them to Skyline for 65.
You should have worked out a better deal. That's the ice house in the background. When Jack and I first came to camp, my dad was a wonderful, wonderful man, but he could not put a screw in a wall. He just was not mechanical, and the buildings really were tumbling down. The first thing we did was to remove Cabin Row because they could not be salvaged. And the ice house was also on the list. It was crumbling down, and the wing that went to the dining hall was really decrepit. But while we were cleaning out that old ice house, I said, gee, Jack, there's a box up on that top shelf. Will you grab it for me? He brought it down, and it was a quilt, an album quilt that went back to 1844 in the Norton family. There had been raccoons spending the winter in that place, but that quilt was untouched. I don't know how. This is a picture. On Wednesday nights, they always had a picnic supper, and it was very, very popular. Deal would make baked beans and this incredible turkey and rice salad, and the feature were sticky buns, little clover leaf sticky buns just dripping with glue. It was wonderful. He was an excellent chef. Jack's family vacationed from Connecticut. He started coming when he was 7 years old, and we were visiting tonight about what should I tell him about the food. He had a pretty set menu, and Sundays were always roast turkey. Saturday night was always roast beef, corned beef and cabbage, just excellent, excellent meals. But he was a very thrifty cook, and the next day for lunch was quite often a roast beef hash, or, he would never waste a thing, but always homemade rolls, wonderful desserts. His specialty was a chocolate fudge cake to die for. It was just wonderful. People returned to Skyline because of the food. And I just wanted you to know that good food continues at Skyland. Our cabins are still very rustic. We have 4 that have complete kitchens, but some of them have just a small fridge and a 2-burner hot plate, and our people put on gourmet meals. Isn't that right? Right. They get together and cook meals as a group. This happens to be our Labor Day pig roast. This is a fellow from the Middlebury Lions Club that comes up. So I want you to know that in the exact same place where my grandparents used to have their picnic suppers, we still celebrate. I think there are a couple more pictures just showing the food and the crowd. And this year we did a barbecue rib special, and it went over extremely well. My old boss from Bethel, I used to work as a school nurse in Bethel, my high school principal came for the weekend. And he got through the meal, and he said, Priscilla, how do you do it? You just put 100 people through that line without a hitch. And I said, because it takes a whole village. And our people are just wonderful. We have a group of seasonal campers that are just incredible at organizing and pitching in and cleaning up. And we feel very blessed. And the food is good. I don't know how many of you have been to Skyland, but I certainly would invite you to come visit us sometime. Come on a day like today, the view was just unbelievable. The mountains are just so crystal clear.
You have a picture?
Yeah, and I brought a couple of pictures just to show you. This is a sunrise. We look over at Mount Mansfield and Camel's Hump. We can see as far over as the sandbar, and then Camel's Hump, Mount Mansfield, Camel's Hump, and then off to the right we see the bike trail and the Adirondacks. So it's spectacular. This is, we don't get the sunset, of course, but we get beautiful reflected colors over the mountains. In each season, it just seems to change, and people say, do you ever get sick of this? And I said, no, never. You know, the colors are different, and the birds that are around are different. It's just a beautiful, beautiful spot. And this is why my grandma named it Skyland. You know, she tried to combine land and sea and sky, and she just couldn't come up with anything that sounded right. And the night before they were due to head back to New York City, she said, how about Skyland? And I think it's pretty aptly named.
So that notch in the middle of the picture is the cut, right?
Yes, yes, that's now where the bike ferry goes across. That has been a wonderful attraction. So many young families love to bike, and on our website we have a link to the bike ferry, and cars just keep coming loaded with their bikes, and we're a mile from the entrance, so they really have enjoyed that a lot.
Tell us a little about your dad.
In 5 words or less. He was the best father you could ever ask for. He was very humorous. He had a wonderful attitude about life. One of the stories that I remember when we were raking those mountains of leaves was, he said, you know, Priscilla, you'll never own this land. And I said, yeah. And he said, you're always going to be a steward of this land. And I remember that as we go through our days and some of our trials, and being an owner of a campground is not always simple. You know, you have personalities to deal with the problems that arise, but we just feel very blessed to be there. My dad was a country doctor. He was an osteopath. He made house calls, which I hear frequently is a thing of the past.
We used to be able to set our clocks in the morning.
Now, I want to bring this up for you, Peg, because he always told me there was nothing to get up for before lunch. But if he was called out, he would.
The bus. And
I just want him to hear me.
I know a little story. My son was playing out there on a hill or someplace, and had a big, some crying in with his. Our sons, we lived by that rec path, you know, the old rail bed, and my sons, that was their playground. And one day they were coming in, and my younger son was crying like mad. And he got in, and there was this big splinter sticking out there and sticking out here. And I said, we got to go see Dr. Norton. Then he took his snips and he pulled that, and he said, pulled up the other side, said, you could have done that.
I think my dad was very proud. Both my sister and I became nurses, and I think one experience that really changed my life was I was 11 years old. He had his office in Grand Isle attached to our house. It's where the Bullises now live. And it was probably 8 o'clock at night, and he yelled in and said, Prince, you've got to come help me. So I ran into the office, and he handed me a newborn infant. The woman was on her way to the hospital, and she knew she wasn't going to make it, and she drove into the yard and said, I need help. And he actually delivered this baby in bitter cold weather. And he had my mom running for hot water bottles, me wrapping the baby up in towels. And, you know, anyone that's held a New Morgue, maybe you just don't ever forget that experience. But
Priscilla, tell about your dad and the fish hooks he used to save and stuff.
oh, he took out many a fish hook, not only from campers that fish, but people all over that would end up with fish hooks, and he always saved them up above the sink in his office. As a matter of fact, we now rent that, and we always have to explain to people that we're sorry we can't fix that one little piece of molding, and they, well, why not? And so I have to tell them the story. That's our reminder of Dad.
So where was the kitchen that we were seeing?
That was, as you look at
The location
the
of it?
front side of the dining room,
Yeah, where Beal was,
it was off to the left of that, right across from our office.
okay. Oh, the
And then,
building across the
yep, and then there was a back porch where the staff would eat. That was a screened-in porch, and then the ice house came off of that.
Okay.
Priscilla, you
Yes.
want to just mention some of the romances?
Well,
or-
I should. This whole section over here is Skyland.
We're all Skyland.
And the fellow that just spoke is my dear, dear cousin Roger from Canton, New York. And I do need to say that Skyland is a very romantic place. If there ever is a full moon and you want to see something beautiful, come down to Skyland. It's unbelievable. Our aunt, who was my mom's sister and Roger's dad's sister, came up to Skyland for a vacation to have a little rest. She was in a stressful time in her life, and she met my dad. And went home and said, Dottie, you have got to meet this guy. I just know you love him. So the next year, they came up, and they met, and sure enough, they were married the following year. Roger's mother's family used to vacation at camp. Is this right? Yeah. And through Marge, he came up to visit and met his mom, Agnes, and they were married. Roger and Helen now have a seasonal trailer with us. So we try to keep this going on and on. Their granddaughter calls their trailer the Love Palace. I actually met Jack there. He was 4 years older than I was, so I just had to grow up so I could finally catch him. But he loved Skyland long before he loved me, so it was an easy thing to convince him to return. But many, many romances have started. Yeah.
Were there two Phelpses?
Ronnie, help me out.
Help you out?
She said, were there two Phelpses?
I'm Ron Phelps,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
and Bill is my brother.
right.
But John and my Uncle John, who is deceased now, used to, I don't know if he worked at Skyland or not, but he used to date Nancy Harlan that was at Skyland, and they wound up getting married. My aunts and uncles, there were 11 people in my family, my father's family. And I lived in the Phelps house on South Street. And they communicated with Skyland all the time. They worked down there, they dated down there. The grapevine that Chris talks about on the front porch, the poplar trees in front of my house, I curse my grandfather every time the wind blows. But that used to be all apple orchard on both sides of the road, on the Robinson farm and on the Phelps farm. And behind Skyland, where Jude lives now, used to be orchard. John Duffy lived there for a while. And my grandfather and Clarence Robinson planted those poplar trees for a windbreak for the orchards. That's how they happened to be there.
Just as a point of interest, I find it fascinating since any kind of waterfront property in South Hero is taxed so heavily. In 1926, my grandparents paid, yes, $1,600 for Skyland. They paid an extra $1,000 because they wanted 2 more rows of apple trees so they'd have a little bit more land. And I think Clarence had just planted those rows, so it cost a little bit more.
I don't know what my grandfather played for the farm there, but he owned the property all the way from Skyline to Camp Hochelaga. It was 113 acres at one time.
Big chunk.
And it's all been sold out of the Phelps family, except for where John Phelps lived next to Hochelaga.
We've had a lot of campers that have fallen in love with South Hero and have ended up moving here. Many.
Got one over here.
There you are.
What's your name?
Elaine Raybo, and we spent summers, we had a camper, trailer, the campground, wherever we were, for, I don't remember, 8 years maybe, something like that. And, that's when the house went on the market. We'd take walks in the morning, and there was this house, and, we ended up buying it, and became South Hero residents. We've been in South Hero now about 18 years.
And what street are you on?
South Street. Well,
Just beyond you too is the Malones actually camped with us for a year while their house was being built.
yeah, they were ahead of us. They were,
And then Russ and Jen Brown beyond them, and the
right
Selkins
down
down
the street, and
on
they
Phelps
came
Lane.
here.
So a lot of people
Yep.
So
We're
you
a
help to
neighborhood
populate the town.
of Skyland people.
We had, quite a few years ago, relatives by marriage came to visit us. And they said, could they go down to see Camp Skyland? And we said, how did you know about Camp Skyland? And they said, we went there for our honeymoon. And they were from Massachusetts.
You know, every summer we have old guests come back and it's wonderful. This summer, a car pulled in and an elderly gentleman got out, and before he did anything, he turned around and just looked at the lake. And I said, he's been here before. You know, it was just the look. He came into the office and he said, I didn't think this would still be here. And I said, well, I'm Uncle Will and Aunt Mabel's granddaughter. Oh, you can't be. He said, I'm 82 years old and I'm checking off my bucket list. And he said, I had to see if Skyland was still here. So I got out the old albums. I mean, we have so many. Trying to see if we had a picture of him because we have a lot of, he had worked on the staff in the 40s. And he started telling me stories about your great aunt. They hung a snake over a screen door and scared her half to death. And she ran up and told Aunt Mabel, and Aunt Mabel gave them the business. And
I think that gentleman might have stopped at my house before he got to Skyland.
well, it was just a wonderful afternoon with him, and I put him in our golf cart. I knew he couldn't walk around the property, and I said, come on, we're going for a ride. And we went up and saw some of the cabins and went up to the point, and he said, I can't believe you took this time. And I said, I can't believe you shared all these wonderful stories. You know, it's a real treat.
Was it Mr. Skillman?
It was Mr. Skillman. But that happens every year.
Yeah.
I had a woman drive in a huge motorhome once, and she got out of the motorhome and she was in tears, and I ran out and I said, is everything okay? Are you okay? She said, I can't believe this is still here. I made my husband drive all the way from California to see if this was still here. So memories are really important that you make.
And thank you so much for sharing those memories with us tonight.
Thank you. Yeah.
And be sure to come back, because next month is going to be on the sandbar. And I'm sure there'll be lots of stories about the sandbar and the Phelps family. And
I'm sure.
thank you for coming.